Howdy friends, and welcome back to another game-filled volume of Japan Only PS1 games with your Irish pal from the PAL region, Mr. Seanson. Play me an excited Godzilla sound effect. And today is not just any volume, we've managed to hit the big 1-0, which means we've got something special in store. How special that is might depend on if you've already watched volume 10 of obscure and forgotten PS1 games, but that series is shite anyway, nobody watches that. So the big twist is that we're gonna send the regular wheel of games on vacation for a temporary rest, and instead, all 4 of today's games are gonna be selected from the viewer wheel. That's right, as a thank you for all your support throughout the series, it's time for our first of hopefully many Japan Only PS1 game viewer specials. And let me tell you, unlike the PAL Only minefield that is the obscure and forgotten viewer wheel, the Japan Only wheel is almost exclusively cool oddities or stone cold bangers, so you're almost definitely in for a treat. Or it could just be Pepsi Man. Seriously, a lot of people pick Pepsi Man. Anyway, that's enough chit chat. I hope you're ready for another obnoxiously long deep dive into the Japanese PS1 library, because it is time to play some games, and today, you will provide.
You will provide.
Gokuu! Gokuu!
誰だ俺を呼ぶのは
悟空お願い助けて
誰だ何回何でやめろ俺だ悟空だ千葉陽太か兄貴悪いが勝たせてもらうで
Coming up first in our viewer special is Gokuu Densetsu Magic Beast Warriors, a PlayStation exclusive which made its way to the console in May of the year 1995. This game was chosen for the wheel by Spectre227, and let me tell you, Spectre has picked a wacky one for us here today. So, fighting games. The PlayStation sure does have a lot of them, some in 3D and some in 2D, and some using the old 90s classic digitized graphics. You know Mortal Kombat's influence was pretty big when even Street Fighter tried it out that one time, and thankfully it didn't catch on. Well, Gokuu Densetsu Magic Beast Warriors is another of these digitized fighters, although instead of capturing images of actors to superimpose them into the game, they went one further and got the actors to dress in wacky monster costumes, and then decided to build a fighting game around that. They also might have blown all the budget on some crazy cutscenes and special effects too. It's kind of amazing, all things considered. Of course, beneath the zaniness you're seeing on screen, there is a fighting game here too, and I'm sure as you all know, some funny characters a fighting game does not make. Just ask that Jaguar game with the Scottish lad who shoots fireballs out his jaffers. Man, how did they fuck that one up? That's a moneymaker right there. Anyway, back on topic, let's see if Gokuu has the fighting chops to back up its zany concept. So, first things first, this game was both published and developed by a studio called Alimer. I have never heard of them before playing this game, but a little research shows that they've had experience making fighting games in the past, most notably in the arcade, with titles like Gladiator in the 80s and its 1992 follow-up called Blandia. Man, Blandia. What a name. So, with the advent of disc-based systems, Alimer obviously wanted to try something a bit grander than what they were previously able to do in the arcades, and I suppose they said, okay, what if we made a fighting game that was a cross with like a tokusatsu style show and used that to retell the age-old Chinese tale, Journey to the West, but now with like B-movie special effects. By the way, for those unaware, tokusatsu is a term used to describe a movie or TV show full of special effects. You know, your Ultraman, Super Sentais, anything kaiju related, and yeah, there you go, that's a tokusatsu. So, Magic Beast Warriors aims to give you the best of both worlds. Special effects laden live action scenes where people in amazing costumes beat each other up, and also a fighting game where you essentially do the same, only it looks marginally less realistic. So I suppose we should break the game down into 2 parts, the gameplay itself and these live action scenes, and since the gameplay is the most important part, we should probably start there. Now, considering this is a very early release on the console, it doesn't surprise me when a fighting game's menu screen is pretty low on content and modes, but this game might actually have the least amount of options I've ever seen in a fighting game, with a choice for story mode and versus mode, and that's it. The game doesn't even have an options menu or difficulty toggle, it's just story mode for single player or versus for multiplayer. But hey, at least it does have multiplayer. That's something. Anyway, let's start with the game's single player content, the story mode. This mode sees you work through a series of 8 best of 3 brawls, and when you begin, you only have one character to play as, that of course being the star of our game, the Monkey King himself, Sun Wukong. Now, as you move through the story and win fights against your opponents then join up with you as part of your crew, and they become selectable for the next fight. This happens all the way up until the end of the game, so by the time you're fighting your final opponent, you'll have a total of 8 different costume-clad fighters to choose from, a decent number overall in my opinion. As for the fighting itself, it's fine, I guess. Here's the thing, I've played many fighting games from the early and mid 90s especially that are aggressively unfun to play, right? And these digitized fighters, when done poorly, can absolutely be some of the worst out there by a long shot. Thankfully, this absolutely isn't the case with this one. As a fighting game, it feels competent. I guess that's the best way to describe it. It works as you'd expect, attacks come out quickly when you press a button, it feels and plays like a fighting game. That being said though, the fighting itself is just very uninteresting. The game opts for a 4-button input system most similar to an SNK fighting game, 2 buttons for light and heavy kicks and another 2 for light and heavy punches. A lot of the core stuff is there, from sweeps, throws and some basic combos. It's nothing spectacular, but it does all function well enough. The special moves, on the other hand, are a little disappointing. It's not that any of them are particularly bad, it's just once again none of them are particularly good. You've got projectiles, dashes, some anti-air stuff, all perform using the usual quarter circles or double taps. And while the game doesn't have an in-game moves list you can access from the pause menu, the character select screen is nice enough to give us inputs for each of the playable characters prior to entering a fight. Although this highlights another issue, the incredibly small amount of special moves on offer. Each character has anywhere from 2 to 3 special abilities, and while in a game like Street Fighter a limited special move set doesn't really matter because all the abilities are very useful, in this game some special moves are utterly useless, so the character balance just isn't all there, I'm afraid. It just makes for a fighting game that works well enough, but isn't really anywhere near good enough to make you want to play it for the fighting itself. You're mostly just going to play this game because it features digitized actors and costumes, shooting weird faces at you while some weird FMV plays in the background on the stage. And honestly, while this stuff has certainly aged a lot, this is one of those of the era games where the reason you're playing it isn't for the gameplay itself, it's really everything else that surrounds it. Some of this stuff has to be the most out there imagery I've seen in a fighting game. I know it's all loosely based on A Journey to the West, but there is some straight up nightmare fuel in this game, let me tell you. On the whole, would I say the graphics and visuals here are very good? I mean, it's really going to come down to how you personally feel about the digitized style and the vibe that they were going for, but for me, personally, I think they actually did a pretty good job capturing the feeling of the tokusatsu style in the gameplay. I love the faces the characters make in the portraits when they get attacked, the fight choreography is quite good for a game of its era, and the whole thing runs quite smoothly as well. I could see some folks not digging this style at all, but genuinely I think they executed on their vision quite well, and it's one of my favourite examples of the digitized fighter style. And adding to the overall presentation, the in-game music and sound effects are top-notch as well. All the characters in the game are fully voiced, we'll get to that in a minute, don't worry. And while they don't talk much during the fights themselves, the professional voice acting does really add to the usual grunts and groans you'd hear during battle. Plus general sound effects for hits and damage pack a nice punch too. But maybe one of my favourite things about the game is the game's suitably cheesy guitar-heavy soundtrack that expertly straddles the line between badass solo heavy hard rock and complete unadulterated butt rock. When a game is this extra on the visual front, it's nice when the devs give the game a soundtrack that only serves to enhance it in every possible way, and believe me, they did just that. So yeah, that's about it for the single player content, and as we already mentioned, the only other playable content is the versus mode, which is limited to 2 players only, no CPU battles unfortunately, but you can at least play as every available character in the game, including the final boss from story mode, who is exclusively playable here, so that's nice. So finally, now with all the gameplay covered, let's move on to the undeniable highlight of the game, the story cutscene. Before and after every fight, you'll be treated to live action scenes featuring your fighters going at it in real time. And while these are fully voiced in Japanese with no subtitles unfortunately, let's be fair, you really don't need to know Japanese to understand or appreciate what is going on here. Everything is just so gloriously over the top, delightfully low budget yet incredibly high effort, and the actors are hamming up each of their lines to the max. Here is just a small sample of some of the stuff that this game is packing.
ここはどこだ。
すごい勇気よ。
見覚えある場所だ。兄貴、あれあれ。待ちかねたぞ悟空。今度こそその首もらうぞ。覚悟せい。いいよ。奴のところまで案内しろ。知らんわ。
皆さん、私が案内します。ついてきてください。
待て、奴は偽物だ。
バレたら仕方がない。
さあ、誰から行きましょうか。
I love this so much. Look, if I had any gripe with these things, is that there is nowhere near enough of them. These scenes often last about 20 or 30 seconds, and they always just leave me wanting more. The reason I play the fights is for more of these, and truthfully, when you add up the total amount of time it takes to watch all of these and then actually beat the game, you're really only looking at about 20 to 30 minutes of gameplay, which is short to say the least. Sure, there are different endings depending on who you beat the final boss with, but those endings only last a few seconds, so it's really hard to say if they're actually worth the hassle. So that's about it for Gokuu Densetsu Magic Beast Warriors, a concept that I really can't get enough of, which is a shame because there is really very little to this thing at all. Let's be fair, this is a game you play for everything in it but the game itself. If you took away all this crazy stuff, you would have a functional but incredibly dull fighting game that is criminally low on content. Sure, adding all these cool costumes, live action scenes and butt rock make it significantly better, but at the end of the day, the gameplay is really what counts, and it drags down this game from a potential cult classic to a funny game that you crack out on a stream or when you're drinking with your pals. Although that being said, I had a look online to see how much this game goes for nowadays, and I was shocked to see it is actually quite pricey to buy physically. And like I said, if you keep in mind that this game has roughly 20 to 30 minutes of unique content, even with the live action stuff, it becomes quite the hard sell. Gokuu Densetsu is a game I can't really recommend buying, or playing for that matter, but it's another very memorable, very funny, and very unique video game from Japan, and hey, at least that makes for good YouTube content, so I got that going for me, which is nice.
お久しぶりです。うわあ！ちょっ！おけよ！昔のようにはいきませんよ。
You will provide.
Next up, we got one of the most infamous Japanese exclusives on the console. It's the wonderfully titled Harmful Park, which made its way to the PlayStation in February of the year 1997. This game was chosen for the wheel by Silver Soliloquy, and out of all the words that I struggle to pronounce correctly, I'm surprised that Soliloquy ain't one of them. For many, Harmful Park is a game that needs no introduction. In spite of being a Japanese exclusive title, I'd argue that the game is probably the console's most well-known exclusive shooter, second only to Einhander. And while this game is known for being quite good, its claim to fame is actually due to how expensive it is, and as of this video, the prices a box copy are going for are absolutely eye-watering, making this possibly the most expensive regular release PS1 game of them all. Not bad for a cute little shoot 'em up where you fight giant women. Now look, if there's one thing I've learned over the years, a game's price and rarity is absolutely not an indication of its quality, so let's ignore the game's perceived value for now and actually see what this game is all about. So, Harmful Park was the product of a development team called Skythink Systems, a short-lived studio responsible for an early puzzle title on the platform called Kero and Pa. This series seen 2 entries in total and might just show up in a future volume of the series, if we're lucky. And of course there is Harmful Park, which was their final game as a studio. A game that naturally didn't sell very well and ended up with the studio shutting its doors. An unfortunate but all too familiar sight for studios focused on 2D pixel art games in a market where 3D was becoming king. And it's especially sad when you consider Harmful Park might just be the console's most impressive 2D game, featuring some of the brightest, most detailed and visually interesting pixel art that I've ever seen in a game. Normally I'd wait to talk about the graphics and presentation, but I mean, look at this thing. Every enemy, every background, every boss, every explosion is just bursting with personality. I usually watch back some of the footage after I've played a game, and I could not believe the amount of cool stuff that's just going on in the background that I completely missed while focusing on the action. This cow getting abducted, this bear and rabbit saying goodbye. Like, I want a game about these guys. I want to know their story. Now, there's no denying Harmful Park takes heavy inspiration from some of the parody shooters and shoot-'em-ups that came before it, most notably the Parodius series of games, but there's just something about the look and feel of the various theme park worlds you'll visit throughout this game, the little animal friends, the amount of moving parts. I really think this is like top tier 2D work and design, a game made by experts in the craft. Never in a game have I died because I was too busy focusing on some little friends clinking beers, but in this one, I have. And most impressively of all, in spite of how much is happening both in the foreground and in the background, the gameplay is also never messy or unreadable, an issue that I've had with many shooters on the console, some a little worse than others. So yeah, straight out the gate, Harmful Park has got to be up there with the likes of Mega Man 8 as one of my favorite examples of 2D gaming in the 32-bit era. Top marks from me. But of course, why are we actually shooting all these weird cute enemies and bosses in a colourful theme park? And more importantly, is shooting them actually any fun? Well, let's find out. So the story in this game is actually quite an enjoyable one. In the far-off future of 2017, a mad scientist by the name of Dr. Tequila has opened an amusement park named Heartful Park on an isolated island. Within days of opening, the park was a massive hit, filled to the brim with happy customers enjoying the various rides and activities. But then, out of nowhere, Dr. Tequila activated his trap card and turns all the rides and fun creatures into murderous killing machines. Think of that one episode of The Simpsons in Itchy and Scratchy Land, and you've got the right idea.
Dad, the Flash must have scrambled their circuits!
What are you, the narrator?
So yeah, Heartful Park has become a harmful park, if you will, and Dr. Tequila is now requesting the island become an independent nation using the hordes of people trapped in the amusement park as his hostages. But how do we stop him, you ask? Well, a scientist who previously worked for Dr. Tequila has decided to send her 2 daughters on some experimental superbikes to take out Dr. Tequila and rescue everybody in the park. It's a shoot-'em-up story, alright, let's just roll with it. So that's pretty much all you need to know. It's certainly one of the better in-game excuses I've found for killing a whale using finger guns, I suppose. As for the gameplay, it's very much a traditional horizontal shooter. You and up to 1 friend go through 6 different stages of shoot-'em-up action. You've got a total of 4 different weapons available to you at any time, which can be cycled using the X and O buttons, but a better way is to actually use the shoulder buttons, each of which being assigned to one of your 4 weapons. Each weapon can be powered up 4 stages by collecting a P icon in-game, and each weapon also has a special attack variant which drains one of your limited special stock upon use. The weapons themselves aren't anything you haven't seen before, but to add some flavour, in this game they're all food themed. Your standard shot is a potato gun, with the special being a screen clearing potato. Your laser shot is an ice cream gun with a very powerful mega ice cream laser as the special. Your homing shot is a jerry bean gun. No, not jelly bean. Jerry bean. Its special is a Jerry Dessert Shield, which makes you invincible for a short period. And finally, your explosive or grenade type weapon is Throwing Pies, the special of which launches a big bunch of rockets all over the screen.
Lovely stuff.
This is one of those games where if your weapon is powered up to max, you are very strong, and if you're at level 1, you are very weak. So you'll want to avoid dying if at all possible, not just because dying is bad, but it also resets your currently equipped weapon back down to level 1, and of course getting hit once is enough to make that happen. Although as long as you have another weapon sitting at high power as a backup, thankfully it shouldn't take you too long to get your previously lost weapon back to murderous levels of firepower. As for the scoring system, well, the name of the game as always is multipliers, and the way you get a multiplier in this game is by killing multiple enemies with the same bullet, meaning your laser, explosives and homing shot are quite good for this, and your standard potato shot, while probably the best weapon in the game for clearing enemies, is in fact terrible for getting a high score. So while the scoring system here isn't terribly unique or original, it does promote playing through the game with a different mindset rather than just blasting everything as you see fit, which is the way that I like to play. I've got a donkey brain, what can I say? All in all, it's a very satisfying, if unoriginal take on the horizontal shoot 'em up formula, and while the gameplay is very good, the thing that is really going to sell you on this game is just how beautiful and absolutely bonkers it is from beginning to end. Like, the things I'm going to remember about this game are the parts where you fight a Frankenstein who's flipping you the bird, or the bit where you're dodging the tears of a poor soul left at the altar. Whoever comes up with this stuff, bless your beautiful mind. And I suppose considering how memorable the game's visuals are, it's a little disappointing to say that the music doesn't quite live up to the rest of the game, I'm afraid. While there are some definite standout tracks, the Halloween and roller coaster levels being 2 fine examples, the rest of the game's music, while very fitting to the overall aesthetic, is very much just kinda there in the background. And in a genre like this, music can oftentimes be what make or break a game's icon status, so it's a shame to say Harmful Park misses the mark somewhat. It's certainly not bad, but by shoot 'em up standards, it's not that great either. At least the sound effects pick up some of the slack in the sound department, with some bright and punchy shot noises and some explosions that almost sound like they're ripped straight from Metal Slug. But hey, Metal Slug has some peak explosion sound effects in my book, so there's nothing wrong with that. The game also features a hefty amount of voice work, as well as cutscenes, not just for the opening and ending scenes, but in between each level transition as well, making for a game that pushes a cut above most other shooters on the story element, something that's clearly a benefit of the game being developed with console in mind. So that's a little overlook of Harmful Park. A full playthrough will take you about 25 to 30 minutes, a breezy but very enjoyable experience from start to finish. I actually ended up playing through the game a few times, not just because it was fun, but the default difficulty in this game is actually set to easy, and let me tell you, it is very, very easy. Normal mode certainly offered a more balanced challenge in my opinion, but for those looking for a nice beginner shoot 'em up or even something a bit more challenging, the various difficulty options definitely make this a good choice for any level of shoot 'em up player, be they a veteran or a complete novice. Also, hold up, we didn't even get to talk about the bonus extras included in the game. For those looking for a real challenge, the game also features a score attack mode where you play through a bonus 7th level not included in the main game. A very, very hard level, which I did not do very well in. At all. And also, nestled in the options menu, there are a selection of 3 different minigames. We've got Punch Ball, a Pong style game for 2 players. There's Sky Circuit, a racing game for 1 to 2 players where you gotta blast through a course as quickly as possible over 3 laps. And finally, there's Tank Battle, a take on the classic combat from the Atari days, which can be played with up to 4 players if you've got a multi-tap handy. Minigames are usually nothing more than a nice little addition to pad out the game, but the quality of these things are also significantly higher than they really needed to be, so their inclusion here is very much appreciated. And there you go, that's everything Harmful Park has to offer. And after all that, is the game worth the prices it's demanding online? No, absolutely not. In fact, no game is worth that much money, let's be real. But is it a good game? Yes. 100%. It's an incredibly pretty, joyful, and solid playing shoot 'em up that's just a good time all round. It's not the most technical or unique shmup on a gameplay level, and the music ain't really up to the standard of some of its contemporaries, but it is a game I think any shoot 'em up fan would enjoy from start to finish, and it's also a great choice for complete beginners too. Plus, it's very import friendly, just maybe download it from the Japanese PSN for $6 or emulate it instead of bankrupting yourself. That's a much better and more ethical option, I think you'll agree.
You will provide.
Kicking off the second half of our viewer special, we've got Love and Destroy, releasing on the PlayStation in the tail end of 1999. This game was chosen for the wheel by Gabriel Lucas, and Gabriel here might have delivered us the most Japanese game we've seen on the series so far. You see, Love and Destroy is sort of a hybrid genre mix-up of a game. On one hand, we have a third-person mech action title that takes heavy influence from a certain Gainax classic, and on the other hand, we have a dating sim where we build relationships with robotic female navigators that help us pilot our mechs. Love and Destroy. It's All in the name, see? So yeah, quite the concept, and truthfully, it's one that I find very intriguing. I can't personally say I'm really into dating sims, at all, unless it involves pigeons, that is, but I do love mech games, and really, anything with an idea as out there as this game's, well, I'm more than happy to dive in and see what it's all about. So first things first, this game is actually published by Sony themselves. It was a co-project between Sony's first party studio, Arc Developments, probably most famous for their work on the Arc the Lad series. I mean, it's in their name after all. And also Inti Creates, who I'd imagine more of you would likely be familiar with. Inti Creates was a team made up of ex-Capcom staff who broke off to do their own thing, and ironically ended up making a lot of games for Capcom down the line anyway, so they wouldn't go bankrupt. Although nowadays they're probably known most for their excellent retro revivals like Blaster Master Zero and Bloodstained Curse of the Moon, but Love and Destroy here is actually the second game they ever put out as a studio, the first being the PS1 title Speed Power Gunbike, which doesn't just have a cool name, but great box art too. That game is floating around in the viewer wheel as well, by the way, so rest assured we'll be talking about this game at some point too. But for now, it's time to love and destroy. Now allow me to be upfront, there is a lot going on in this game plot-wise. It's the kind of thing where if I could fully read and understand all the dialogue here, there's a good chance I would still be a little bit confused, and seeing as I can't read or understand any of it, I was very confused while playing this game, but thankfully people have kindly documented the plot online in English, so let me try to break it all down for you. So in the future, an alien entity known only as Germ has wiped out most of humanity. To counter the Germ invasion, mechs known as battle pods were developed for combat. Now, these battle pods were equipped with a system known as SEED, S-E-E-D, which stands for Synchronized Energy of Emotive Dynamics. Are you still with me here? Okay, good. Let's keep going. The SEED system feeds off positive and sympathetic emotions to enhance the battle pod's offensive capabilities, and to maximize SEED's potential, you would ideally form a romantic relationship with the battle pod's robotic navigator, which is known as a Qtron. So let's break it down. We need mechs to be aliens. We need the mechs to be strong to beat the aliens. We can strengthen the mechs by making robot girls fall in love with us. Mech feeds off the happy feelings of love and therefore increases its strength to help us destroy said aliens. This all makes a lot of sense and we should not question it at all. So this whole plan, let's just say it didn't work out very well, and in a last-ditch effort to save humanity, a scientist sends a ship filled with some mechs and Qtrons back in time prior to the Germ invasion in the hopes that we can stop it before it gets out of control. So naturally, it is up to us, horny unnamed teenage protagonist, to save the day. So yeah, this game is, for lack of a better term, fucking wild, let's just put it that way. It's also a really high budget production too, with character designs from manga artist Masakazu Katsura, who also did the character work for Astral Chain, by the way, and plenty of animated cutscenes from Production IG, who worked on projects like Fooly Cooly and Psychopaths to name but a few. So yeah, clearly Sony, Arc Developments and Inti Creates were really going all out with this project. Hell, the PlayStation itself even makes a few appearances in-game, and we love a good animated PlayStation cameo, let me tell you. So on paper, we've got the making of one hell of a game, but the thing is, Love and Destroy is, in my opinion, a game of extreme highs and also extreme lows. It's a game where within the space of 40 minutes, I've gone, holy shit, this is the coolest thing ever, to oh dear god, what were they thinking? So I suppose we should probably start from the beginning. When you boot the game up and make it past all the cool cutscenes, you get greeted by our little robot instructor friend called Egg. This guy tells us a lot of stuff in Japanese. What that is, I couldn't tell you, but thankfully the menu and UI is pretty easy to figure out, mostly because it's in English, and that I can understand. So the goal in this game is to take on a series of missions against various Germ invaders. Prior to each mission, you get some information on your opponent and the arena that you'll be battling in, but you also have to choose from one of 3 different girls to take on the mission with you. Vivi, our token tsundere, Lulu, our token sad girl, and Kiki, our token happy girl. Not only do these girls have their own individual mechs with different abilities, but the more you use them, the more you strengthen your relationship with them, which not only means more powerful weapons for your mechs, but plenty of cutscenes too, some hornier than others. Now each mech does actually have a unique playstyle, and prior to each mission, you'll get a recommendation on which girl is best for which mission, but you always have the power to pick which girl you want to take. Kiki the green girl offering up a speedy mobile mech with lower strength weapons, Lulu the blue girl giving you a slower, less mobile mech but with powerful long range weaponry, and Vivi the red girl giving you a balance between the two with some cool melee weaponry to boot. How the story plays out really comes down to what mixture of girls you pick. Maybe you want to develop a relationship with all three, maybe you want to focus on your number one waifu. How that all pans out is up to you. Now, of course, all of these segments with the girls, both in-game and during cutscenes, were entirely in Japanese, so personally I have no idea what was going on between the girls and my character. So while I would say the game is very playable for a non-Japanese speaker, at least on a gameplay level, all this dating and story stuff, not so much. We'll talk more about that aspect of the game in a moment, but we should probably finally talk about the gameplay itself, which truthfully gave me such a good first impression. I thought I had struck gold here. So this game being a later release actually makes good use of the DualShock controller and its analog sticks, with your movement being on the left stick and your mech's aiming and turning being on the right stick. Using this method actually felt really good and allows for some great control with simultaneous precise aiming. You fire using the R2 button and you can jump and dash using the L2 button. The only other buttons needed are the R1 button for swapping weapons and L1 to answer incoming messages from your co-pilot. No face buttons needed for this one, guys. By the way, there are a ton of in-game messages. It's actually a big selling point on how many of these there are to discover, and whenever they activate, you get this really cool silhouette of your co-pilot over your screen, which is so stylish and visually striking. Even if I couldn't understand what they were saying, I really never got tired of seeing it. And honestly, piloting this mech, running about this neatly designed city combat arena, fighting creepy looking aliens, I was all for this. I thought it played well, it looked good, and after beating the first mission, I really couldn't wait to try more. So beyond this first mission, you then get to pick the order of the next 3 missions, each with one of the 3 girls in mind. So I said, okay, let's give each of the girls a try. Now, each mission in this game is essentially just a boss fight with a 5-minute timer, and at this point I realized the mech that we used in the previous mission, you know, the one with the cool opening, that's gone now. And now we have our 3 real mechs, and this is where the issues started to arise. So the camera, it's locked to this third person perspective, and to say it's a bit cramped and claustrophobic would be putting it mildly. Now, if you're playing with the green mech that can jump up and move quickly, I'd say it's not too bad. If you're playing with the blue mech that moves really slowly, I'd say the game is almost unplayable. This also gets worse when you're fighting big enemies that fire projectiles at you that you quite literally cannot see coming, or enemies that move so fast you can't keep turning fast enough to keep track of them. This blue mech can do really cool things like activate a long range cannon mode and fire tons of homing missiles, but the camera and controls just make it super unfun to use, and if you want to woo the blue girl, you just kinda have to put up with it. And as the game goes on, it just keeps getting worse and worse too. Okay, what about the red mech then? Kind of unfun too. While it's certainly more mobile than the blue mech, the weapons just aren't all that satisfying to use on this one, and some of the later fights in particular just don't feel balanced for her abilities, and likewise the cramped camera just makes things feel really messy and oftentimes just out of your control. On the contrary, the green mech, by far the most enjoyable way to play this game. It can move really fast, fly across the map, and has 3 excellent weapons that are all useful and serve their purpose. This still doesn't make the cramped camera a non-issue, but the abilities and movement of the mech are at least much better suited to deal with the camera's issues. Now, the reason why this stuff really bugs me is at least 2/3 of the game's mechs just aren't very enjoyable to play with, and that means 2/3 of the pro tags that you can invest time into and level up with make for a rough gameplay experience. And if you're like me and are only really in this for the gameplay, then that's not very good. In fact, I would say the peak of this game is ironically the opening mission, which in spite of it being a training mission and featuring the game's most basic weapons, feels like the most polished part of the entire game, oddly enough. Every other enemy and area in this game falls victim to the camera issues, and the enemy attack patterns and AI that you'll see in these levels are just really kind of annoying to deal with. But what caught me off guard most of all, and this I really didn't expect, was that after about 40 minutes of play and 6 missions in, the credits started rolling. Now, this includes not just the gameplay and menu navigation, but also the cutscenes with the various girls too. Now, I know I'm not the target market for these segments, nor can I fully appreciate them really, but I can't really imagine I'm going to develop any sort of emotional attachment to these characters if there's about 5 or 10 minutes dedicated to them per playthrough. Sure, there are a lot of cutscenes, which although are very high quality for sure, are very short. This game is so short that I managed to play through it a total of 4 times in about 2 hours, once with a mixture of the girls and then once focusing on an individual girl each time. Sure, you get more cutscenes, dialogue options and messages when you play through with a different girl, but the mission structure and mechs never really change. And as I mentioned, a full playthrough with the blue and red mechs, not great. Green mech, on the other hand, much more fun. Also, if you max out your relationship with a girl before the final fight, you gain access to a hyper love laser that lets you just win the fight immediately, which, while cool, I don't think the game really benefits from a function that makes it even shorter somehow. So yeah, Love and Destroy is in many ways the ultimate mixed bag. I don't think I can recall a game with so many cool features, visual elements, this high a budget and just outright potential that's just squandered by jank gameplay and its incredibly short length. The game almost feels like it's an unfinished tech demo even, and trust me, I love a short video game, especially when it comes to making these videos, but a dating sim where you're supposed to get to know and connect with these characters beyond their superficial details, well, they just really drop the ball with that aspect. But look, to its credit, when Love and Destroy is good, this game feels like it could have been one of the best mech action games on the console. But when it's bad, it might also be one of the worst. And I know that sounds strange, but trust me, this is a very strange game. But hey, where I am going to give this game its due for all my problems with it, presentation wise, this may be one of the coolest games on the console. Sure, it doesn't feature the cleanest graphics or mech design that you'll ever see, but when you're stomping around a city in a mech fighting some cosmic horror, few games on the PS1 look as good as this one does. There's some amazing effects like these distortions in the sky, the weird visual changes to the level geometry when you or the enemies interact with it, not to mention the performance delivers an almost rock solid 30 frames per second, and the UI and menus are just top notch too. Plus the cutscenes really are some of the highest quality on the console, and the sound and voice work all excellent too. The music, on the other hand, is a bit hit or miss. The in-game music for the battles works best, I feel, when it tries to highlight the horror of the creatures that you're fighting. Other times it uses some rather generic music that, while completely inoffensive, is just mostly forgettable, really.
「エリートプログラムスタート」今触れたボタンでコアブロック内のキュートと思考を共有することが可能です。よろしいですか？ターゲットロスト。
Honestly, the highlights for me are probably the main menu and ending themes, probably because they sound like something you'd hear in an actual anime program, but hey, they kinda slap. So yeah, that's Love and Destroy, maybe one of the most frustrating games I've played, not just because at times it can be very, very frustrating, but really because the potential here is off the charts. It's honestly one of the coolest and most visceral mech games on the platform, but to really enjoy it, you gotta put up with some very annoying stuff too. Plus, the dating aspect of the game really does suffer thanks to the game's short length, even on multiple playthroughs, at least. That's what I would say if I could speak Japanese and knew what they were actually saying. You know, in spite of how I feel about this game, I would love to see this thing get a fan translation sometime. I get the feeling it would be a lot of work considering how many animated scenes and character messages are included on the disc, but a part of me still thinks this game is really interesting and cool, even if parts of it are frustrating and very bad. It's actually very similar to a Saturn game that recently got a fan translation called Bulk Slash, and even though Bulk Slash is a much better game in my opinion, a translation similar to the one that got would likely do wonders for Love and Destroy. Also, an interesting fact, Love and Destroy was such a critical and commercial failure in Japan that it almost resulted in the closure of Intercreates, leading the team to eventually reunite with Capcom and go on to make the much loved Mega Man Zero series of games. So there you go, if it wasn't for Love and Destroy, there might not be no Mega Man Zero. It's a funny world. Anyway, clearly I had a lot to say about this one, and really even with my issues, I think it's a game some of you may still really enjoy, so I urge you, as always, to check it out and make up your own mind. But one thing's for sure, it's a game that I won't be forgetting anytime soon, for better, and most certainly for worse.
デリートプログラムスタート 残らずデリートしちゃいましょう
You will provide.
Rounding out today's selection of games, we have Kero King, which made its way to the PlayStation in December of the year 2000. This game was chosen for the wheel by Jerry Curl, which might just be one of the cleverest usernames I've ever seen. Fair play to you. Alright folks, who is in the mood for a sports game? I know after last volume's tennis extravaganza, you're all clamoring for more. But unfortunately, this time we won't be bringing you a tennis game, but in fact, golf. Another relatively posh sport. Now, similarly to tennis, golf is a sport that I'm not particularly fond of, be it playing or watching, at least the traditional variety that is. Now, if we're talking mini golf, then this might actually be my favorite sport of them all, for obvious reasons.
You're gonna die, clown!
Also, I'd like to take a moment to thank America for creating a big budget mini golf themed competition show. Keep up the great work, guys. You'll love to see it. Anyway, back to video games. Golf, once again, in spite of my inability to play it in real life, I really enjoy in video game form. This is probably in no part thanks to the plethora of great golf games over the years. We've got Mario Golf, we got Neo Turf Masters, and my personal favorite, the Everybody's Golf series, the PSP versions of which I invested more hours into than I'd probably like to admit. Generally speaking, the more video gamey a golf game is, the more likely I am to enjoy it. While I'm sure EA's past offerings and the more modern attempts at golf games are quite good, I'm always going to prefer a Golf with Your Friends or a Wii Sports, you know, the zanier the better, really. And that brings us to today's game, Kero King, which may actually be the king of zany golf games. Don't tell Kirby's Dream Course I said that. So let me ask you a question. What happens when you take golf and combine it with a frog? Well, you get Frolf, of course. And today's game isn't a golf game, but the very first Frolf game. Or if you live in Japan, Kerof game. Now, I say very first because Kero King is actually the first game in a franchise that did eventually make it to the West. If you've ever heard of the game Ribbit King, well, this Japan Only PS1 entry is the predecessor to that game. And while I was aware of the game Ribbit King, this will be my first time getting a taste of the wonderful sport that is Frolf. So let's dive in and see what it's all about, shall we? First things first, Kero King is the product of a development team called Imedio. Imedio had previously worked on a variety of sports titles on the console, most notably a few games in the Simple series, including a golf title that actually did see a release in North America under the name Putter Golf in 2001. Although unlike their previous releases, this game is actually a collaborative effort with a Japanese artist by the name of Yosuke Kihara, whose DNA is all over this thing. The characters, the music, the plot. This is Yosuke Kihara's world. We're just playing Frolf in it. We'll talk more about the look and presentation later, but for now, let's answer the question on everybody's mind. What is Frolf and how do we play it? Well, the good news is Frolf at its core is just regular old golf. Yes, there are plenty of aspects that are very different to golf, most notably the fact that you're catapulting a frog using a hammer, but if you were to pick this game up out of the blue and try to play it like any other golf game, you'd probably pick up the basics quite quickly. You aim like a regular golf game, you have a power meter that behaves like a regular golf game. Your aim is to get the frog into the goal at the end in as little shots as possible, just like a regular golf game. And the frog even moves in the wind and rolls when it lands. Sorry, did I say roll? I meant hops. So clearly the fundamentals and principles of golf are still intact when it comes to Frolf. But you can't have a game as wacky as this and not add a few twists to the formula to spice things up, and this is where Kero King really begins to shine. You see, while it does benefit you to get your frog into the goal in as few shots as possible, similar to actual golf, Frolf uses a completely different scoring system, one that's based around points, and in this game, big points are what you're after. You see this little gem above the hole. This represents the amount of points you'll receive once you get your frog there. But every shot you take reduces the value of the gem and therefore the amount of points that you'll earn. You have up to 8 shots to make it into the goal, with the score reducing each time. Take more than 8 and well, you fail the course, which is not great, as you'd imagine. Now, while the scoring system here is different, your goal is really no different to regular golf, right? Well, it would be, but getting your frog into the goal isn't the only way to earn points in this game. Throughout each course, you'll see a number of different objects and hazards. We've got some familiar sights like water hazards, bunkers, trees, but in this game you've also got spider webs, whirlpools, thunderclouds, flies, lots and lots of flies. This is where Frolf really begins to shift from regular old golf, because things that would be a hazard in regular golf are in fact good if you happen to be a frog. And not only can you manipulate these things to help you get to your goal quicker, but doing so can also net you bonus points and even buff your frog's power depending on how happy it is. For example, if your frog enters water or eats a fly, you know, like a frog would, it gets happy and can travel further on your next shot. If your frog gets stuck in sand, struck by lightning, or gets hassled by a snake, then your frog will be sad and have reduced power next turn. Not only that, these objects can also help you travel across the map too. Rivers transport you, whirlpools teleport you, webs help you bounce from area to area. And if you land near a fly, your little froggy can't help but jump a few extra steps towards it, for better or for worse. There's even modifiers like golden flies that give you even more power when eaten, and also poison flies that make you miss a whole turn. And when doing some of these things can also earn you bonus points for performing them, with multipliers for combos and even point deductions for certain hazards, well, you can see Frolf is clearly not just your average golf game with frogs. There's a whole extra element in strategy and even puzzle solving included within. Now, there are a lot of variables and objects to take into account when playing this game, and when you look at all of this on screen as a newcomer, I wouldn't blame you for being a little overwhelmed by what you're seeing. Now, the good news is Kero King comes with a very thorough and robust tutorial explaining the controls, basic concepts, and each and every interaction that you can come across. It's a little lengthy and entirely in Japanese, but the game does a good job of showing as well as telling, so even non-Japanese readers and speakers should be able to understand it no problem. And while the game is relatively pick up and play friendly, the game does have some surprising technical depth as well, giving you access to chip and slice shots if you hold a direction on the D-pad while shooting, and even some limited items that can buff your power or give you a timed cure for eating a poison fly. So if you do decide to play this game, trust me, give the tutorial a whirl if you can. You will thank me for it later. So that's a breakdown of what Frolf is, and frankly, this in many ways feels kind of like my dream golf game. It's got elements of traditional golf, mini golf, and just its own unique original ideas, to the point where it simultaneously feels very familiar and completely unlike any other sports game I've ever played. It's probably the most video gamey golf game I have ever played, and I've played Aqua Teen Hunger Force Zombie Ninja Pro-Am, so you know that's really saying something. But unfortunately, while I think the gameplay is both really fun and quite unique, the game does have some issues that I feel hold it back and might turn off more casual players, and it almost all revolves around the game's single player content. So to get this out of the way, the game's single player content is this incredibly charming story mode where you play as a little boy who basically ends up in an alien planet, challenging various creatures to games with Frolf. There are a bunch of cutscenes which are all wonderfully animated, and despite them being in Japanese, are very, very funny on a visual level and are without a doubt one of the best parts of the game.
Ah! 試合だよ。さあ、握手して始めて。
よろしく。お。
寝ない。
How could you not love this? Now, the way this mode works is each area basically represents a different course, and each course has 10 holes. To beat an area, you gotta beat 3 different opponents in any order across all 10 of the holes. When you beat an opponent, you then earn some cash which can be used to refill your items, or sometimes even buy new outfits and clubs from your opponent. So far, so good. Now the thing is, 10 holes may not seem like a lot, but due to the nature of how Frolf was played, with the many different chain reactions and variables taking place during a game, and the fact that you also have to watch the AI partake in all of this too, a 10-hole game of Frolf is long. Very long. On average about 50 to 60 minutes long. One round of Frolf is longer than the entirety of Love and Destroy, and that's assuming that you do well. If you're bad at Frolf, it will take significantly longer. Now look, I personally don't mind that a game of Frolf is long. I play games like League of Legends, and I'm used to games spiraling into chaos and being dragged out for 50 or 60 minutes. It is what it is, you know? But there's so much downtime while playing this game solo, and especially with your early opponents who are so bad they'll often run out the 8-shot limit, the games can really drag. And when you also have to do this not once, not twice, but thrice on the same 10 holes before you unlock a new course and new opponents, Well, that's nearly 3 hours of gameplay before you begin to even see some new content. And this continues with each new area as well, and the opponents get much tougher too. So if you end up losing, that's even more time down the drain. Now look, this isn't going to be an issue for everybody. Truthfully, the game has a plethora of content, and maybe a nice long steady game to play in the background is good for you, but for me, it's spread out just a little too much for my liking. I think 2 characters per course would have been ideal versus 3, and it just serves to alienate all but the most patient of players, which is a real shame because the core gameplay itself is really quite the treat. Now these issues of course wouldn't be a problem in multiplayer because if you're taking turns with friends, clearly the game would be at its best. But of course, to unlock additional courses and characters, you gotta invest time into single player mode, and it is gonna take you a long time to get stuff. I feel like this is a monkey paw moment for me because I hate when games either give you bonus content very easily or make you pay real money for it rather than having to earn it in game. And in this, it's exactly what I want, but I have to work too hard for it. Man, gamers can never be happy, can they? I feel like it's just built into our DNA to be whiny, right? Ugh, feels bad, man. Although, let's take some time to be positive again, because we gotta talk about this game's presentation, and it is absolutely wonderful. Yosuke Kihara's artwork really elevates this game to the next level, and its implementation into the game using both 2D and 3D is such a great look. There's definitely shades and inspiration from what was done in Nana Onsha's classic Parappa the Rapper, who themselves collaborated with American artist Rodney Greenblatt to bring that iconic world to life. I think if that game didn't exist, we wouldn't see a collaboration as out there and risky as this one is, but I'm oh so glad it does. Characters range from Animal Crossing-esque humanoids to cats, monsters, and peanuts. Not to mention, each character also has their own unique frog wallet in game, just to add that extra touch of charm. It's just a game that's bursting at the seams with personality, from the way the frogs roll into the goals or the many different parts of the UI. And while the 3D elements maybe aren't the strongest you'll see on the platform, and the map design can feel a little bit cluttered and claustrophobic at times, the game's quirkiness and pure unbridled joy always manages to shine through. Even the loading screens are cute. You love to see it. Music and sound are another strong point too. As mentioned, the game's many cutscenes feature full voice acting, which, while I can't understand, very much match the energy levels of what you're seeing on screen, which only adds to the scenes at hand. The sound effects and music are also pretty great too. The game features a very playful soundtrack that sounds like it was recorded by somebody just hanging out and vibing in a room with a Casio, and I mean that in the best possible way. It can be catchy, it can be funky, but it never sounds overbearing or out of place for a golf game, you know? And considering how long the matches are, it's a good thing the music is enjoyable to have in the background constantly. Well, that's about it for Kero King, a very enjoyable and original take on a golf game, both mechanically and visually, that I unfortunately feel is held back by just how long the thing takes to play. Now, of course, this won't be an issue for everybody, but I do think it will rub less patient people the wrong way, and honestly, it's a shame because the game really does kind of rule otherwise. It's so nice to see a game turn a basic concept on its head like this and make a weird, funny, joyful video game out of it. And really, there are few better examples of this out there than Kero King. I'd say if you're interested in trying this game, the game's next-gen follow-up that did make it to the West, Ribbit King, might probably be your best bet, but it turns out that game is also rather expensive. Man, retro collecting kind of sucks these days, doesn't it? But lo and behold, a copy of the original on the PS1 is much more affordable, and it's even got Pocket Station content too, so hey, it's a win-win. So yeah, even with my issues, the game has more than enough content here to make this a decent purchase if you like golf and or frogs, although probably ideally both. There's gotta be some of you out there. And with that, it's time to wrap up our very first Japan Only PS1 Games viewer special. Another fine showcase of games showing us once again how interesting and varied the console's Japanese library can be. And we also managed to avoid Pepsi Man for at least another episode. What a time to be alive. Today we got to check out a fighting game where a guy dressed as a monkey beats up a guy dressed as a pig. One of the console's most bright and colourful shoot-em-ups that also costs about the same as a kidney on the black market. A game about romancing some robot waifus, and there's some mechs in there somewhere too. And finally, the game that introduced me to the wonderful sport of Frolf, and also this snail. I love this guy. Now, as is tradition, we can't finish up without first assigning each game a ranking, because as we all know, that's the only way we can really determine a game's worth in the grand scheme of things, am I right? Do I consider any of today's games a must play? Should you give them a try if you like the look of them? Were any of the games just kinda meh? Are any of the games trash and not worth your time at all? Or did I find any of the games unplayable due to the language barrier? Well, today's viewer selection sees Gokuu Densetsu, Magic Beast Warriors, and Love and Destroy fall into the meh tier, and Harmful Park and Kero King making their way into try tier. Gokuu Densetsu, Magic Beast Warriors is a very funny, charming, and entertaining game to experience, but how good of a game is it to play? It's fine. What we have here is a competent but very limited fighting game that's really just mediocre at best when you break it all down. Not to mention you'll have seen pretty much everything the game has to offer in about 20 minutes, and while that can be a very entertaining 20 minutes, you'd honestly be able to experience all the best parts of this game without ever needing to play it, and well, that kind of says it all really. That being said, if you ever wanted to play a silly fighting game when your friends are over, this game would probably go down a treat. Just maybe don't pay 50 quid for a physical copy if you can help it. Love and Destroy is maybe the most frustrating game I've played since starting this channel, because deep down inside it, there is an incredible mech action game, and when the game is at its best, it has some of the smoothest playing and visually appealing mech action on the console, but thanks to a cramped camera, some unenjoyable mechs, frustrating bosses, a dating system that never seems to get properly fleshed out, and a surprisingly low amount of content, the game just feels like one big missed opportunity. It's clear a lot of effort was put into this thing, but there's too many flaws and frustrating moments to personally recommend it. That being said, it's still one of the coolest and most visually appealing games on the platform in my opinion, and if this game ever receives a fan translation, I'll be more than happy to hop back in and give it another try, that's for sure. Harmful Park, on the other hand, is a very enjoyable and well-made shoot-em-up with incredible 2D visuals, and after playing it myself, I'm not surprised it's earned its reputation as one of the console's premier exclusive shmups. Now, how much of its reputation is down to its price versus its gameplay, that might be debatable. Would I put this game on the pedestal next to games like Einhander, Thunder Force 5, R-Type Delta, G Darius, Sexy Parodius? Probably not. It's lacking a bit of the technical depth and variety some of those games offer on a gameplay level, but what is here is still very good and is in my opinion one of the best options for genre novices on the console too. Where the game absolutely excels though is in its visuals and presentation, featuring some of the most vibrant and detailed 2D visuals you will see on the console, not to mention some of the most original and cleverly designed segments I have ever seen in a shoot-em-up. While it's certainly not worth the price a physical copy demands, if you have access to this game, you are in for a good time and some gorgeous visuals, so why not give it a try? And finally, Kero King. This honestly might be one of my favorite reconstructions of a traditional sport that I've ever seen. You take the fun, easy to pick up and play gameplay of a golf title, add in a bunch of additional features and gameplay elements to add depth and originality, and you tie it all together with the concept and artwork of a man who really likes frogs, well then you've got some lovely stuff. That's why it pains me to say it's also a game that really does not respect your time. While there is a lot of content on offer, you've got to invest hours into this game to access most of it, and a lot of that time will be spent playing the same content over and over again, to the point where it can wear away a lot of the game's charm and start to make it feel a bit repetitive before it even really gets going. Although while this was an issue for me, this may not be an issue for you, so if you've got a lot of time on your hands and like original takes on sports games featuring frogs, well then this game should be right up your alley. Now before I forget, we of course have to give a special shout out to the wheels chosen this episode. So give it up for Spectre227 for Gokuu Densetsu Magic Beast Warriors, Silver Soliloquy for Harmful Park, Gabriel Lucas for Love and Destroy, and finally Jerry Curl for Kero King. Thank you all for the fun mixture of games for today's showcase. Appreciate you all. We will of course be back to the usual random selection for Volume 11, but as always, if you want the chance for your game to appear in future volumes of the series, drop your pick in the comments below and I'll get it added to the ever-growing list. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's viewer special. Thank you so much for sticking with me through 10 volumes of the series, and as long as you guys are happy to keep watching them, I'll keep making them, don't you worry. I'll of course have more videos out as soon as I can, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to praise the wheel. See ya!